Welcome back to A Considerate Life. It's been almost 2 weeks since the assassination attempt on former President Trump, and it's taken me a while to sit back and process, think through some of the implications of these things. I titled this video, President Trump and Millions of U.S. Assassins. And I don't mean that hyperbolically, but I do mean it theologically. And as we get a little bit deeper into the video, I'll show you from Scripture why this hatred toward Trump really amounts to assassination. Before we get to that, I want to set the stage by waxing philosophical just a little bit, so if you'll indulge me. I want to read a short passage from Aquinas' De Malo, or On Evil. It's from Question 1, Article 3, the response. He says, "And so this is clear. For in all things of which one ought to be the rule and measure of another, good results in what is regulated and measured from the fact that it is regulated and conformed to the rule and measure, while evil results from the fact that it is not being ruled or measured. Therefore, suppose there is a carpenter who ought to cut a piece of wood straight by using a ruler. If he does not cut straight, which is to make a bad cut, the bad cutting will be due to his failure to use the ruler or measuring bar. Likewise, pleasure and everything else in human affairs should be measured and regulated by reason and by God's law. And so the non-use of the rule of reason and of God's law is presupposed in the will before the will makes its disordered choice." So what Aquinas is saying here is this. The will, which is our faculty of volition, should be guided by two things. It should be guided by right reason, or the rule of reason, and it should be guided by God's law. Now, as we're thinking about Trump as the next president of the United States, we have to attend to these two things. We have to attend to good reason, and we have to attend to God's law. If we don't attend to reason, good reasons, and God's law, Aquinas indicates that our choices will be overcome by our passions and will end up being irrational or, in other ways, evil. Now, very briefly, on the side of good reasons, I want to turn to a short clip from an interaction between Larry Elder and Michael Rappaport on Michael Rappaport asking Larry Elder, why in the world would you support Donald Trump?
How can you support this guy?
This is going to make a lot of sense to you. These two professional golfers were being interviewed. And the host said, what makes a good golfer? And the other one went like this. I look to see where the ball lands. I like where the ball lands on immigration, on abortion, on judges, on taxes, on losing the regulations, on reversing the war against oil and gas, on standing up to China. That's what I like. The rest of it is white noise, pardon the expression.
Okay, so not being a political pundit myself, I allowed Larry Elder to put into words all of these reasons why we might prefer Trump versus a Democratic candidate in the election in November. So there's a rule of reason. Do you have good reasons for rejecting Trump or accepting Trump, right? Those reasons should guide your choice in November. And Larry Elder's made a strong case for a good, principled, reasonable approach to policy that Trump is running on. Our choices being guided by the rules of reason, God's law. Let's turn to God's law. In Matthew 5, Jesus says two things that should inform our choices here. At the beginning of chapter 5, he says that if you despise your brother, it's like murder. You've heard it say, do not murder, but I tell you, do not be angry with your brother. Do not despise him, basically. So how is it that being angry with or hating Donald Trump is like an assassination? It's like an assassination because of this rule, this principle of human conduct. And that is this. Human conduct is measured. Its morality is measured by how far our heart moves away from God. This is why Jesus also says, if you look at a woman with lust, it's like committing adultery. How is it like committing adultery? Because the desire to be unfaithful to your spouse, that desire in the heart moves the heart away from God to the same degree as actually committing the act, right? And so the inherent immorality of it is how far our heart deviates from the rule of God, which is the rule of love, because God is love. Later in Matthew 5, Jesus says, love your enemies so that you can be sons of your Father in heaven. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So based on the rule of reason and the measure of God's law, I would say two things. This assassination attempt is an outworking, it's an outgrowth of millions, and I would say maybe tens of millions of people who despise Donald Trump. They're angry with him. They disdain his existence. And to the degree that they can, to the degree that it moves their heart away from God, they have murdered Donald Trump in their heart. Based on this biblical principle, we haven't just had one failed assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, but we have tens of millions of assassins, people that in their heart have murdered Donald Trump because of their disdain, their hatred of him. And so I'm not being hyperbolic, but I am being theological in saying that there's been more than one assassin of Donald Trump. People that hate Donald Trump have moved that far away from God in their heart. If you found Larry Elder's reasons deficient, that you have your other reasons for not voting for Trump and voting for the other candidate, right? Then that's fine. You have to be ruled by your own conscience. But what I am saying is that God's law demands that even if you don't like Donald Trump's policies and wish to vote for someone else, you at least have to give up this disdain, this hatred of Donald Trump, or you cannot be living according to God's law. John says in 1 John, if anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he is a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. So if by the rule of reason you absolutely cannot vote for Donald Trump, then as a Christian, you at least have to give up this hatred of him, this disdain that is completely ungodly. So how should we be thinking theologically about Donald Trump? This is actually clarified for me listening to the Oliver Anthony song, Richmond, North of Richmond. Now, I want to play a short snippet of it because there's part of it that just is wrong. It's factually mistaken, and I want to address that before we move on. So hopefully we can play this part without getting flagged for copyright infringement.
God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds.
Did you catch what he just said? Listen to this part again.
Taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds.
Bags? Bags of fudge rounds? Fudge rounds come in a box. So listening to Richmond, North of Richmond, it really clarified for me that the average American is living under this kind of oppression, the kind of slavery of what Douglas Murray calls the oligarchs, and actually Eric Weinstein has this term, the kleptocrats. That is, these politicians and technocrats that are basically stealing everything that is not nailed down, as he says. So these are the powers that the average American is being oppressed by, enslaved by, if you will. And so while I know that Donald Trump is not the second coming of Jesus Christ, I know Jesus, and I know that there are some stark dissimilarities between Jesus and Trump. But I do think that Trump could be Moses. Moses was God's chosen instrument to make a way through the Red Sea. God parts the waters, and Moses leads the Israelites out of a life of slavery into the promised land to a place of freedom. So that's it. I thought it was important to come on here and give my reflective take on this assassination attempt and ask people to be mindful about the law of God in terms of the way we love or hate. Hatred is not an option for Christians. Hating Donald Trump is the same thing as assassinating him in your heart. And it moves your heart from this murderous rage, moves your heart away from God. And if you say that I don't care that it moves my heart away from God, then you've got deeper spiritual problems than just a political disagreement with Donald Trump. Okay, so that's it. I'll see you next time. Until then, love truth, do good, and enjoy beauty.